Hi, what are streaming commands in Splunk? Streaming commands are those commands where we can always get the data live. So in Splunk, whenever we are getting the data from various forwarders, just like universal forwarder or event forwarder, the data will be going into the particular indexer and it will be sitting inside the index of this indexer once after the data passes through several queues. Especially four queues we will be having, which are parsing queue, merging queue, typing queue, and indexing queue. Whenever the data passes over these four queues, and if the data sits inside the particular indexer, and then also if the data goes through the particular buckets, we'll be having various buckets as well. Whenever if the data goes through the buckets, at that level only we can always fetch the data by using any type of command in Splunk. But streaming commands are those commands where we can always fetch the data whenever the data is available at the queue level itself, whatever the queues we have discussed right now. Whenever the data is passing through those particular queues, we can always fetch the data by using the streaming commands. That's why we can always say that we can always get data live whenever we use streaming commands. So now let us discuss about those streaming commands in detail. So if I talk about the streaming commands, there are two types of streaming commands we do have. One is called as the distributable streaming commands. Distributable streaming commands. And other is the centralized streaming commands. So what are these distributable streaming commands and what are these centralized streaming commands, Kiran? So distributable streaming commands are those commands where we have to use at the indexer level only, because they will analyze the events. They can analyze event by event only to that particular index, data related to particular index. So that's why we can always use distributable streaming commands only at the particular indexer level. So distributable streaming commands are the commands where they can analyze event by event and can be used only at the indexer level. For suppose if I use the streaming commands and if I can analyze the data only to the particular indexer. For suppose if I do have data that is coming from various indexers, say this is my indexer 1 and this is the indexer 2 and this is the indexer 3. So all these indexers data, so it is coming through the particular search head. This is my search head for suppose. All this data that is coming over here. So if I use this particular streaming command over here, I can always search by writing SQL query whenever all this particular indexer data, all these host data are available at my search head level, right? Then only I can always write SQL query. I can always collect the data and I can always get the results. That is the thing that will be happening. But whenever in the distributed streaming commands, right, whenever I get only data pertaining to the particular index, okay, so if I also use the same distributable streaming commands over here in the search head, so I can always get any one of the index but not collectively of all the indexers data over here, right? So that is the particular stuff. That's why we cannot use distributable streaming search, okay, for the particular search head. So distributable streaming commands are not be useful whenever we want to use from the search head. So then which streaming commands we have to use? We have to use centralized streaming commands. So centralized streaming commands, they can collect the data. They also analyze event by event. But the specialty of the centralized streaming commands is that they can always collect the data and then they can pass it to the search head so that we can always have the data, use the entire data and we can get the results. So that is the use of centralized streaming commands, right? So both the streaming commands can get the data live, but distributable streaming commands are the commands where they will be analyzing event by event and are getting data limited to the particular index only, whereas centralized streaming commands, they can always collectively get the data, even though they can analyze event by event, but it will be having the capability of collectively getting the data from all the particular indexers, and hence we can always use it from the search head. At the search head level we can always use. This is the difference between the two streaming commands. And if I say which commands we will be using for distributable streaming commands and central streaming commands, so commands like fields, right, and eval, all where, okay, these are all the commands we can always use, whereas the particular command we can always use for the distributable streaming commands. And similarly for centralized streaming commands, if I say, we'll be using commands like stream stats or your transaction command as well. Why? Because fields command, eval command, where command, they can always use the particular data, okay, related to the particular index, and we can always get the results. But if you want to use stream stats, right, it has to use various functions, and also it has to group by. After by class we'll be using various fields as well. It has to group by the data and it has to get the results. So that's why we can always use at the search head level. Similarly, transaction is also a command where it will be grouping the particular events as well. So this command also we can always, once after getting all the particular indexers data that is reaching to my search head, then only I can always use the entire data and I can get the results as well, right? So that is why these are the commands that we can always use for centralized streaming commands. So now if I see the features of this particular commands, so if I discuss about the execution feature, so if I break down, okay, so whatever the features that we do have for distributable streaming commands, distributable and centralized. So when it comes to execution, distributable streaming commands, as we have discussed, it can be executed only at the indexer level, whereas centralized streaming commands, it can be executed at the search head level, right? And the processing, distributable streaming commands, they can do event by event processing. And when it comes to centralized streaming commands, they can do collective processing, even though they also can do event by event processing, but collectively all the information will be getting to the particular search head. So collective processing also this particular centralized streaming commands can be doing. And when it comes to access, only partial data we can always access, whereas here full data we can always access. Full data that is coming from all the particular indexers we can always access by using the centralized streaming commands. And if it comes to performance, distributed streaming commands will be having more performance when compared to centralized streaming commands. So even though both the commands, either distributed streaming commands or centralized streaming commands, they use it to get the data live, but when compared to distributed and centralized streaming commands itself, because distributed streaming commands will be having somewhat more performance than the centralized streaming commands, because they will be analyzing the events only to that particular indexer only, whereas centralized streaming commands, they will be collectively analyzing all the indexes data. So that's why, so performance of the distributed streaming commands will be more. And the commands, as we have seen, the commands, which type of commands we can always use for distributed streaming commands, we can always use whereas the particular command, fields as the particular command, and also eval as the particular command, likewise we can always use. And here for centralized streaming commands, we can always use stream stats, or else you can always use your transaction command, likewise we can always use, right? So this is about the streaming commands in Splunk. Please like, share and subscribe the channel so that it will be useful for others. This is all in this particular video. Again we'll be meeting with another topic. Until then, have a great time. Bye bye.